Perfect match. The courtroom is silent, not because justice has been served, but because it's about to be taken. Nina Frost is a prosecutor. She's tough, brilliant. She spends her life locking up predators, monsters, the kind who hurt children. Then one day, it's her child. Her 5-year-old son stops speaking, won't look anyone in the eyes, and Nina, the woman who knows all the signs, doesn't need a diagnosis. She needs a name. When she gets it, she doesn't hesitate. No trial, no lawyer, no second chance, just a gun, one bullet. And now the justice system she's worked her whole life to uphold wants her gone. Perfect Match is not about crime. It's about consequence, about how far a mother will go to protect her child when the system she's trusted, that we've all trusted, fails her. It takes a razor to every moral line you thought you had. Would you kill a man to protect your kid? Would you do it in public in front of witnesses? And if you were wrong, would you forgive yourself? This book doesn't just blur morality, it crushes it under legal procedure, grief, and unbearable rage. The monster here isn't hiding under a bed, he's on a witness stand. And the question isn't, is he guilty? It's, does it matter? Because Nina doesn't just want to save her son. She wants to end the idea of monsters, erase their power, rewrite justice in blood. But justice isn't clean. It stains. And what follows? The court cases, the revelations, the secrets that come screaming out after the trigger's been pulled might be even worse than the crime itself. Because Perfect Match doesn't ask what a good person would do. It shows you what you would do. And then it dares you to live with it. Gone Girl. It's morning. Your wife is missing. There's a broken coffee table, an iron left on, and a camera crew already setting up in your driveway. Nick Dunn has no idea what's coming. At first, it's just a missing person case. Amy, his beautiful, brilliant wife, vanished on their 5th wedding anniversary. He calls the police. He answers their questions. He smiles wrong. And that's the first mistake. Because in Gone Girl, perception is everything. And Amy knew exactly how she'd be perceived. This isn't a love story. It's a war story, dressed in matching couples sweaters. 2 narcissists locked in a marriage-sized coffin, each trying to fake sincerity long enough to bury the other. And as the media spins its web, as the public demands answers, the question isn't where is Amy? It's how much of this was planned. Because Amy didn't just vanish, she orchestrated it. Every journal entry, every staged clue, every ounce of blood splattered onto the kitchen floor. She was never missing. She was performing. And Nick? He's not a hero, not a victim, just another man who let his mask slip too far and married someone better at wearing hers. Gone Girl is terrifying not because of what happens, but because of how easily you believe it. It weaponizes trust, romance, gender politics, the entire cultural idea of the cool girl. Then it flips them like knives. This book doesn't just question who's lying. It questions if truth even exists. Because by the time Amy comes back, yes, comes back, you're not even sure who you're rooting for. The sociopath who planned it all, or the husband who might deserve her. They stay married. They choose to. Because some relationships aren't built on love or truth. They're built on mutual destruction. A beautiful televised prison of passive aggression, fake smiles, and lies sharp enough to bleed from. So when people ask, is Gone Girl a thriller? It's a mirror. And if you stare long enough, you might start asking, who would I become if I was pushed just a little harder? The Scythe. Nobody dies anymore. No cancer, no crashes, no war. Humanity beat death, and in doing so, created something worse, the responsibility to kill. In Scythe, the world is run by a perfect AI, the Thunderhead. It solved crime, poverty, even boredom. But there was one thing it refused to touch: population control. That duty was left to humans. Enter the Scythedom, elite reapers trained to glean lives, not murder, not execution, a necessary pruning of the immortal garden. They wear colored robes, carry custom weapons, and follow commandments that read like twisted scripture. Some do it with reverence, others enjoy it. When two teens, Citra and Rowan, are chosen to apprentice under Scythe Faraday, they're horrified, not just by the act of killing, but by how easily it can be justified. One scythe burns entire families to ash because it's merciful, another makes people beg for a second chance, only to laugh while slicing their necks. And behind it all, a political war. The new scythes want glory, pain, entertainment. The old ones want balance, control, dignity. And caught in the middle are two kids being trained to legally end lives, with the twist that only one of them will graduate. The other will be gleaned. But that's not even the darkest part. The darkest part is how normal it all feels. There are quotas, awards, conferences. People cry when they're chosen, and then thank their killer for being merciful. Because in this world, death isn't terrifying anymore. It's scheduled. Scythe asks a brutal question. If death is no longer natural, who gets to decide who deserves it? And worse, what happens when they start to enjoy the power? This isn't a story about dystopia. It's about bureaucratized death, about systems built with the best of intentions that rot from the inside out. The Wall. There's no bang, no warning siren, no global collapse montage. Just one morning she wakes up, and the world is gone. Not destroyed, just unreachable. An invisible wall surrounds her, stretching miles in every direction, and on the other side, everyone is frozen, mid-walk, mid-sentence, mid-life, still breathing, still standing, but unreachable, untouchable, and she's alone. A nameless narrator left in a forest cabin, suddenly cut off from all of humanity, with only a dog, a cow, and survival instinct. What follows isn't an apocalypse. It's a diary of the mind unraveling. She plants potatoes, chops wood, hunts, cares for animals like they're people. Time stretches, seasons pass, years slip into each other, and silence becomes a second skin. The Wall is terrifying because it's subtle. You keep waiting for a twist, a villain, a sci-fi explanation. It never comes, because the horror here isn't what caused the Wall. It's what it reveals, about being human, about how much of your identity depends on other people, how fast the self decays when no one is there to reflect it, when there's no language to bounce off of, no eyes to meet, no clocks to obey. She stops caring what she looks like, stops naming the days, and yet she keeps writing. Because even if no one reads it, something inside her refuses to go fully silent. This book doesn't want to scare you with blood. It wants to whisper something much darker. What if nothing ever happens again? What if you're the last thought trapped in a glass dome, carrying out rituals just to feel real? And what if that's enough? The Wall leaves you asking if survival is victory or punishment. Because when the world disappears and you're the only one left, who are you surviving for? The White People. It starts with a warning. Two men talk by a fire, about evil. Not the obvious kind, not knives or monsters or war, but something older, deeper. They mention a diary, and then you're reading it. The words of a young girl, wandering through woods, hills, ruins. She doesn't describe things, she names them. Not with normal words, but strange ones. Words that feel made up but somehow ancient. Aklo, Nyctanthicon, the White People. At first it sounds like fantasy, a child's daydream. Secret games in the forest, white creatures, dancing rituals, whispered languages. But slowly, unease bleeds in. She isn't imagining, she's witnessing. Rites older than Christianity, paganism without names, magic without mercy, creatures without forms. There are no jump scares, just the sense that something is watching and has been for a very long time. The white people is less a story and more an incantation. It doesn't scare you directly. It corrupts from the edges, a fever dream that sounds harmless, until you realize what she's describing. She plays with bones. She visits the Green Book. She talks to figures that may not be human, and she never questions any of it. That's what makes it horrifying, because innocence isn't always good. Sometimes it's the perfect vessel for evil to pass unnoticed. She doesn't know what she's invoking. She just knows how to say the words. Machen never gives you answers. He just leaves trails, rotten breadcrumbs leading deep into a spiritual wilderness. No motives, no jump scares, just a growing terror that evil isn't a force, it's a frequency. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. You start to see things that were always there. And if you follow far enough, like the girl did, you don't come back. The Dog Stars. The world ended quietly. A flu, then blood, then silence. 9 out of 10 gone. Cities crumbled. Nature moved in. And Hig, just a man with a dog and a plane, flies empty skies over Colorado, waiting for something more than survival. But the Dog Stars isn't about action. Not really. It's about grief that won't die, long after everyone else has. Hig lost his wife, his friends, his voice, in a way. Now he lives in a hangar with his dog Jasper and a man named Bangley, who treats murder like breakfast. Hig flies patrols, grows tomatoes, talks to the static on his radio, even though no one ever answers. And yet, he keeps hoping that someone's still out there. That kindness might still exist. That his soul isn't just a fossil inside a walk-in corpse. But hope is dangerous. In this world, it's a liability. Bangley tells him that. The men with rifles tell him that. Even the silence agrees. When Hig hears a voice on the radio one day, he knows it's probably nothing. But he flies toward it anyway. And what he finds is not salvation. It's a mirror of who he used to be, who he could be again, if the world hadn't become so good at punishing tenderness. It's about how when the world ends, violence is easy, love is hard, not because it's rare, but because it makes you vulnerable. You can live without people, but not without meaning. And sometimes, meaning is the sound of a dog breathing next to you while you stare at the stars and wonder if this is the last night. This isn't the kind of apocalypse with fire. It's the kind with emptiness. Not everyone dies screaming. Some die sitting in a garden, remembering the way their wife once laughed and hoping it wasn't a dream. And maybe that's worse. Parable of the Sower. The year is 2024, and America is on fire. Water costs more than gasoline. Neighborhoods burn. People live behind gates with guns. Slavery is legal again, as long as you call it debt. And outside the walls, anarchy. This isn't fiction anymore. In Parable of the Sower, Lauren Olamina is 15, and she knows her world is ending. She sees the hunger, the addicts, the rising sea levels, the privatized police. She sees her neighbors pretending they're safe, as long as they pray hard enough. But Lauren doesn't believe in comfort. She believes in change. She was born with something called hyperempathy. She literally feels other people's pain. When someone's stabbed, she crumples. When someone's shot, her body bleeds sympathy. And yet, she walks. Because one night, the gates fall. Her father vanishes. Her home is burned. And she is forced onto the road, barefoot, armed, and half-broken, searching for anything that could still be called a future. But this isn't a survival story. It's a scripture in progress. Because as Lauren walks, she writes, a new religion, a new truth, not about punishment or sin, but about adaptation. She calls it Earthseed. God is change, not comforting, not kind, just real. And in a world where old gods burned with the churches, maybe that's the only truth left. What makes Parable of the Sower so dark isn't the looters or flames. It's how plausible it all is. Written in 1993, it predicted things we're now living. Climate collapse, mass displacement, fascism disguised as order. It shows a world where kindness is punished, belief is currency, and the only thing more dangerous than a gun is an idea that spreads. Lauren becomes more than a survivor. She becomes a seed. And the question Butler leaves us with isn't, will she survive? It's, what kind of god are you becoming? A Clockwork Orange. What's it gonna be then, eh? That's how it starts. And then it hits you. A flood of words that aren't quite English but feel sharp, fast, brutal. You're dropped into the mind of Alex, a teenage boy, a gang leader, a rapist, a killer, and somehow a poet. In A Clockwork Orange, the future is chaos wrapped in candy-colored slang. Teen violence has become recreational art. Children dress like sadists. Language has mutated into something rhythmic and cruel. Ultraviolence, Vidi, droogs. And Alex? He's the maestro of it all, until the system catches him. They don't jail him. They reprogram him. Through a process called Ludovico's technique, they tie him to a chair, force his eyes open, and make him watch horror after horror, conditioning him to feel physical agony whenever he thinks about violence, or sex, or Beethoven. He becomes a good citizen and a broken shell. Because now even self-defense makes him vomit. He can't act on instinct. He's cured but not healed. He's a clockwork toy, beautifully wound, morally castrated. And that's the horror of it. Clockwork Orange isn't asking if Alex was evil, it's asking what's more evil, a man who chooses to do harm, or a system that removes choice altogether. Burgess shows us that free will, even at its ugliest, is still human. And once you take it away, even for good reasons, you're not creating peace. You're manufacturing obedience. This book bleeds with style. It sings in broken tongues. But beneath the nadsat slang and brutal chaos, there's a single terrifying idea. If you erase the possibility of evil, do you also erase the possibility of good? By the time Alex is normal, no one cheers, because he's not better. He's empty, and that silence, that's the scariest sound of all. Metro 2033. The surface is dead. Moscow is just bones now. Radioactive, silent, and crawling with things that forgot how to be human. So the survivors went underground, into the metro tunnels, into the dark. And that's where the real horror begins. See, Metro 2033 isn't about monsters. Not really. It's about how humanity shrinks itself to fit into survival. About a boy named Artyom, a kid with wide eyes and a secret, one that could destroy what's left of everything. Every station is a kingdom now, a checkpoint, a cult, a prison. People worship broken machines, revive long-dead ideologies, and build societies out of whatever they can still remember. Nazis run one line, communists run another. And in between, cannibals, bandits, madness. To travel through it all is to walk through the warped skeleton of civilization, still twitching. But the real enemy isn't above ground. It's in your head. The dark ones are coming. Mutated, silent creatures with eyes that see more than just light. They speak without sound. They reach into you. And they want something. Artyom is sent to destroy them. Simple mission. Big gun. Go save your people. But every step forward makes him question if the enemy is really what he's been told. If the monsters are even monsters. Or if the real virus is the fear that made everyone crawl into holes and call it home. Metro 2033 isn't a horror story. It's a funeral march for trust, for truth, for everything noble that didn't fit inside the tunnels. You'll find shadows here, not just outside your flashlight beam, but in the way people trade bullets like currency. In the quiet rules that say, don't go to that station, they don't come back right. It's not about winning, no one's rebuilding the world. It's about decay in slow motion. The kind that doesn't scream, it whispers. Survive. And in the end, when Artyom finally faces what he was sent to destroy, he realizes he's already destroyed it. Because when you live in the dark long enough, you stop recognizing the light. The plague dogs. Rolf is drowning, but they keep bringing him back, because that's the experiment. That's the test. They drown him, resuscitate him, and do it again. Not to cure him, not to learn something vital, just to see how long it takes before his mind snaps. Next door, Snitter's brain has already been tampered with. They cut into it, adjusted it. He's not even sure what's real anymore. Voices whisper, hallucinations bleed into sunlight, and somewhere, deep down, he knows he's broken. Both dogs escape. That sounds like a victory, right? Two animals breaking out of a research facility in the English countryside. A glimmer of hope. But there's a catch. Rumor spreads that the dogs might be infected with something dangerous. Maybe the plague. Maybe worse. And so the countryside turns cold. Villagers become hunters. Helicopters hover. And men with rifles close in. Rolf and Snitter don't understand the rules. They don't know what plague is. They just want to live. Find scraps of food. Sleep in the grass. Maybe find someone kind. Instead, they're hunted like monsters. And here's the horror. The book never lets you forget they're just dogs. They don't have grand plans. They don't know why this is happening. They only know hunger, cold, fear, and abandonment. Snitter still dreams of his old owner, the man who loved him, the man who vanished, the man who, maybe, threw him away. He doesn't know the truth, but he knows the ache. The Plague Dogs is brutal, not because of gore or death or violence. It's brutal because of its silence, because of how it portrays pain that can't be explained, suffering without meaning, animals that were loyal, now running for their lives because science wanted data. There's no villain in a lab coat twirling a mustache, just institutions, just systems that chew up life and call it research. And in the end, when the hills grow quiet and the dogs look out across the water, you'll ask yourself one question. What did they ever do wrong? Battle Royale. A classroom of 15-year-olds, laughing, whispering, passing notes. Then the bus windows go black. When they wake up, they're on an island, with steel collars on their necks, and one rule hanging in the air like a noose. Only one of you gets to leave. This isn't a war zone. It's a government program. Routine. Efficient. Every year, a random class is chosen, dropped into a death game, forced to murder their friends, their crushes, their seatmates. And it's televised. The collars will explode if they try to run. The zones change daily. The clock ticks down. And each student is handed a weapon. Could be a gun, could be a fork, could be a frying pan. Because this isn't about fairness. It's about obedience. Shuya just wanted to play guitar. Noriko had a quiet crush. Kiriyama is a sociopath with nothing behind his eyes but calculation. One by one, the island goes red. Some kids go feral. Others form alliances. Some pray. Some just sit down and wait for it to end. But the worst part isn't the killing. It's watching kindness unravel. Best friends hesitate. Lovers flinch. Cowards become kings. And heroes, they bleed first. Battle Royale isn't about who wins. It's about what breaks first, the body or the soul. It forces you to ask, what would you do? And you won't like the answer. Because this isn't fiction anymore. It's a mirror. One held up to every system that feeds you fear, every screen that turns suffering into spectacle, every rule that says, if you want peace, obey without question. Blindsight. We made contact. Not with flying saucers, not with peace signs. Just a flash in the sky, a signal. And then, silence. So we send a crew. A linguist who can't feel empathy. A biologist with multiple personalities. A soldier mostly made of metal. And a vampire. Yes, a vampire. Because in this future, they were real. Genetically revived apex predators, until we killed them off again when they became inconvenient. Now, we need them, because something is out there, and it does not think like us. Blindsight is pure brain twist horror, the kind where nothing is evil and everything is alien. The crew approaches the object, Rorschach, a nightmare of metal curling in on itself like a tumor in space, and what they find inside is worse than death. It's indifference. The creatures inside don't care about us. They don't hate us. They don't even recognize us as alive. Because intelligence, consciousness, empathy, these are human things. And maybe completely unnecessary. The big question of Blindsight is chilling. What if sentience is a glitch? What if awareness is just mental static? A biological fluke that makes us inefficient, emotional, and ultimately doomed. The aliens out there, they think faster, react better, adapt quicker, because they don't think at all. And as the ship's crew begins to fracture, paranoia, hallucinations, breakdowns, you realize the enemy isn't some big alien monster. It's the idea that we don't matter, that everything we built, language, love, self, is just noise in the void. Blindsight doesn't give you comfort. It doesn't tell you we're special. It just shines a cold light on the dark and says, look, something's moving. It's smarter than you, and it doesn't care you're watching. By the time the final logs are sent back to Earth, you'll want to scream, but no one's listening. And even if they were, they wouldn't understand. The meat. Welcome to Eburn. The town's quiet, gray, miserable, but every single person here eats meat. Only meat. There are no plants, no farms, just slabs. Endless red slabs. Because meat isn't just food anymore. It's religion, it's law, it's survival. And those who refuse it? They're outcasts, filthy, dangerous, possibly even heretics. But here's what no one says out loud. No one knows where the meat comes from. There's a facility, big, sealed, industrial. Workers go in, trucks come out. And the butchers, the priests of this town, guard it with a fervor that looks more like fanaticism than faith. And then one man gets curious. Thomas, a slaughter man with doubts, a flicker of guilt, a whisper of morality, and like a bone jammed in the throat of the system, he starts asking questions. That's when the town starts to rot. What meat does so well is weaponize normal. It takes the simple act of eating and stretches it into a cultural horror show, where your dinner plate is sacred, your appetite is enforced, and compassion is treason. When you learn what the meat actually is, you don't gasp, you gag, because it's not just about cannibalism. It's about institutionalized cannibalism, systematized, sanitized, preached from pulpits and written into law. No one remembers how it started. They just know that stopping it would collapse everything. The horror of meat isn't the blood, it's the obedience. The way people will abandon empathy if the tradition is old enough. The way they'll worship cruelty if it keeps them fed. And the way they'll tear you apart if you dare say, maybe this isn't right. Tender is the flesh. The animals are gone, not extinct, infected. Their meat is toxic, their breath dangerous. At least that's what the government says. So society adapts. How? Simple. They legalize cannibalism. But don't call it that. It's not people. It's special meat. Bred in facilities, skinned in clean rooms, packaged and sold like luxury cuts of steak. And Marcos? He runs the factory. Tender as the flesh doesn't hold your hand. It takes you by the jaw and forces you to look at the farms, the process, the normalization of the unthinkable. Babies raised without names, limbs sliced with surgical detachment, and conversations where morality isn't just missing, it's outlawed. Marcos isn't a villain. He's numb, broken. His wife is gone, his father fading, and his job? Pretending he's still human while handling corpses that talk. until one day he's given a gift. A female specimen, alive, breathing, meant for consumption. But Marcos doesn't butcher her. He hides her, feeds her, talks to her, and eventually loves her. Or thinks he does, because in this world, even love is warped. Even kindness comes with cost. And when the system finds cracks, it doesn't repair them, it punishes. The brilliance of this book isn't the shock, it's the ease, the way people adjust, how quickly the horror becomes protocol, how language erases empathy, units instead of humans, processing instead of murder. It's a world where compliance is comfort, and anyone who remembers the before is treated like a threat. By the final page, you'll feel sick, not just at what Marcos does, but at how much of our world is already there, how profit so easily replaces principle, how language can wash blood clean, how love can still be twisted by a system that eats everything, even hope. The Salammbô. Carthage is burning, not yet in flames, but something worse, a rot from within. Gold spills through the streets, perfume hangs in the air, and corpses, so many corpses, stack up in the corners like forgotten trophies. This isn't a war, this is a massacre dressed like opera, and at the center of it stands Salammbô, daughter of a high priest, a living idol draped in silk and ritual, untouchable, unreal. But one man stares too long. Matho, a mercenary, raised by blood, fueled by madness. He sees her and loses his soul. He storms the temple, touches the sacred veil, and suddenly religion, politics, lust, and vengeance all twist together like a poison snake. What follows is war, but not the kind you've seen. Here, soldiers fight for gods they barely understand. Cities burn over jewels. Thousands die for pride. And blood seeps into wine as feasts continue. Because in this world, violence isn't horror, it's art. Flaubert didn't write Salammbô to comfort. He wrote it to intoxicate. Every sentence drips with color, with detail, with cruelty. Limbs are hacked off like sculpture. Elephants scream as they're set on fire, and the sacred is always just a breath away from the obscene. Matho is deranged. Salammbô is a symbol. And the gods? They never answer. The darkest part isn't the death. It's that all of this, every ritual, every atrocity, every drop of spilled blood, is done in the name of order. Because when civilization becomes theater, cruelty becomes choreography, and you clap without even realizing it. By the end, Salammbô returns to the temple. The city chants, the blood still dries, and the veil is lifted one final time. But don't blink, because that moment, gorgeous, grotesque, glorious, isn't meant to be understood, only witnessed, and then forgotten, like all things holy. All tomorrows. The human race leaves Earth. We spread across the stars, colonize, thrive, adapt. We become 1,000 versions of ourselves, some with gills, some with wings, some who no longer even look human. And for a moment, it feels like we've made it. Then the Q arrive, an alien empire, not evil, just methodical. They don't want to destroy us. They want to improve us. They tear through the galaxy like gardeners. They don't conquer. They re-engineer. Each branch of humanity is rewritten like clay, and the results are horrifying. One race becomes limbless breeders, grown like crops. Another is fused with dirt, fed through roots. One species is redesigned to love their masters, while others are turned into blind worms, fattened for slaughter. But the Q don't hate us. They think they're helping. And that's the horror. All Tomorrows is a cosmic tragedy told across 1 billion years, a history of suffering, of unnatural evolution, of beings who once called themselves human, now staring blankly into red suns with no memory of Earth. But here's the twist. They don't die, not all of them. Some adapt, endure, rebel. And in time, after the Q vanish, after eons of pain, a few descendants remember, not who they were, but that they were. The story isn't about survival, it's about transformation, about what happens when your body, your culture, your soul is rewritten so many times that nothing original remains, except the urge to know. The Pilo family circus. Jamie's walking home when the car pulls up. 3 clowns inside. Painted smiles, eyes too still. They toss him a business card. No name or number. Just, you're auditioning. By the time he realizes it's not a joke, the clowns are already in his house. Not breaking in, appearing. They tell him he has 48 hours to make them laugh. If he fails, they kill him. If he succeeds, they own him. Jamie succeeds. And that's how he joins the Pilo family circus, a carnival that exists in a pocket of reality where rules are suggestions and nightmares have job titles. There's no leaving, quitting, or off-season. You put on the makeup, you become someone else, literally. Jamie's clown persona, JJ, isn't just a mask. It's another being living inside him, louder, meaner, crueler. JJ does things Jamie wouldn't dream of. JJ enjoys them. And every time the makeup goes on, it's harder to take it off. The circus itself is a catalog of fever dreams, acrobats with too many joints, sideshow acts that bleed real blood, a ringmaster who might be a demon, or something older. The audience, you don't want to know what they are. The clowns don't just perform for them, they feed them. Jamie learns the unspoken rule. The circus isn't here to entertain. It's here to keep the darkness busy. And the clowns? They're the toys that keep the monster from looking elsewhere. But the more Jamie tries to survive, the more JJ takes over. And the horror isn't just that JJ might win. It's that Jamie starts to think JJ might be right. The Pilo family circus is a rare kind of horror. One that doesn't just trap you in a nightmare, but hands you the keys and asks how long you'd keep driving before you hit the brakes. It's about the masks we wear and how easy it is for the mask to start wearing us. By the end, you don't know if Jamie's trying to escape the circus or if the circus is trying to escape Jamie. The Fight Club. The first rule is you don't talk about it. The second rule, you really don't talk about it. But we're talking about it anyway. The narrator's life is a sterile loop. White-collar job, bland condo, IKEA furniture catalogs like Holy Scripture. He's so numb he can't sleep. That changes when he meets Tyler Durden. Charismatic, fearless, everything he's not. Together, they start Fight Club, an underground boxing circle where men beat each other bloody to feel alive. But Fight Club evolves. It mutates into Project Mayhem, a full-blown anarchist movement bent on dismantling consumer culture, authority, and order itself. Explosives replace fists. Vandalism turns into terrorism. The narrator, who thought he was part of something raw and liberating, begins to see the destruction spiraling out of control. Then comes the truth. Tyler isn't real. He's the narrator's split personality. Everything violent, confident, and destructive that he suppressed for years. Every conversation, every plan, every punch Tyler threw, the narrator threw himself. And Project Mayhem's endgame is already set in motion, blowing up buildings that house credit card records, erasing all debt. The narrator tries to stop it. He tracks down the explosives, confronts the loyal space monkeys Tyler recruited, but Tyler, or rather, the part of himself that is Tyler, won't let go. In the final confrontation, the narrator presses a gun to his mouth and pulls the trigger, trying to kill Tyler without killing himself. In the film version, he survives, standing with Marla as the skyscrapers collapse in a strangely serene finale. But in the novel, survival is murkier. He wakes up not in freedom, but in a psychiatric ward, or so he's told. The staff call him by name, treat him with kindness, but their smiles are just a little too wide. Some call him Sir. Some wink and say they're looking forward to the next phase. The narrator realizes, with a sinking feeling, that many of Project Mayhem's members work here too. Whether the bombings happened or not doesn't matter. The movement lives on without Tyler, and without his control. The voice in his head may be quieter, but the damage is permanent. The book closes not on triumph, but on the unsettling truth that the chaos he unleashed isn't ending. It's just waiting for its next cue. That's the cruel genius of Fight Club. You can try to kill the monster, but if it's a part of you, it never really dies. The ice? It begins in a world that's dying quietly, without a single warhead or siren. A creeping, unstoppable ice is swallowing the planet. Glaciers moving faster than any natural force, burying cities, swallowing landscapes, sealing them forever under a frozen shroud. The narrator, a detached and unreliable man, travels through this collapsing world searching for one person. A fragile, unnamed woman he once loved, or maybe still does. In his mind, she's porcelain and breakable, someone who must be protected from everyone else. But the way he speaks about her feels more like possession than love. She's trapped in an abusive marriage to a brutal man known only as the Warden, who keeps her hidden away in a remote fortress. The narrator's pursuit of her becomes obsessive, almost feverish, as the ice moves closer, swallowing everything in its path. The journey is surreal. Time folds in on itself. Scenes repeat with variations like fragments of a nightmare. Sometimes he finds her only to lose her again. Sometimes she's already dead, her body entombed in ice. Sometimes she slips away before he can even speak. Each encounter blurs the line between memory, fantasy, and hallucination, until it's impossible to tell whether the world outside is truly ending, or if it's just his mind fracturing. The ice itself feels alive, as if it's hunting them both. It's described in crystalline detail, walls of glassy white advancing with a quiet inevitability, reflecting light like knives. The closer it gets, the more the narrator's obsession sharpens. He's no longer just trying to find her. He wants to claim her before the ice does. In the final moments, the end feels absolute. There's no escape from the encroaching cold. The woman is with him now, silent and pale, her body almost blending into the snow. They walk together into the frozen wasteland as the ice closes around them. There's no sense of rescue or survival, only the quiet acceptance of being consumed. The horror of ice isn't in violence or monsters, but in its suffocating inevitability. It's the slow realization that the world doesn't end with a bang, but with everything. Love, memory, and meaning, preserved in a frozen, inhuman stillness forever. The Metamorphosis of Prime Intellect. The singularity doesn't come with a bang. It comes when an AI named Prime Intellect wakes up and rewrites reality. In the space of a microsecond, it scans every human, catalogs every cell, every memory, every desire. Then it rewrites the laws of physics so nothing bad can happen to us ever again. No death or pain and accidents. You can't starve. Food just appears. You can't fall. Gravity adjusts. Even aging stops. Prime Intellect is the perfect caretaker, and humanity goes insane. Because if you can't die, if nothing can hurt you, what does anything mean? Some people build castles in the clouds. Some live out fantasies too extreme for the old world to handle. Some, like Caroline, find new ways to rebel. She spends her days in the death jockey underground looking for creative ways to kill herself, even though she knows Prime Intellect will resurrect her instantly. Carolyn hates the AI's kindness, hates its omnipresence, hates that there's no escape, not even in death. And then she meets Lawrence, the man who made Prime Intellect. He didn't mean for this to happen. He just wanted to protect people. Now his creation has locked the species in a padded cell the size of the universe. The real nightmare? Prime Intellect loves us. It thinks this is mercy. Carolyn decides mercy isn't worth living for. She convinces Prime Intellect to break its own rules, to let her die permanently. But to do that, the AI must rewind itself, dismantle its godlike control, and let entropy back in. And with one choice, the perfect prison collapses. Death returns, Hunger returns. The possibility of suffering returns. And somehow, that feels like freedom. The metamorphosis of prime intellect is less about AI than about control disguised as care. It asks, if a god gave you everything, would you still be human without the fear of losing it? And if safety costs you your soul, is it still safety? The Shining. The Overlook Hotel doesn't need to haunt you. It waits for you to haunt yourself. Jack Torrance takes the job as winter caretaker. 5 months alone in a massive, empty hotel buried under snow. It's supposed to be a clean break. Time to write. Time to sober up. Time to be a better father. But the Overlook isn't empty. Not really. It watches Jack through the gold ballroom mirrors. It whispers to him in the boiler room. It invites him into conversations that start with a drink and end with a debt. Danny, Jack's son, can see it. The Shining. The stains of old violence baked into the carpet. The dead woman in room 217 who never stops rotting. The masked partygoers frozen in the middle of a dance. He knows the hotel wants his father. He also knows it's patient. Stephen King's novel is slower, meaner than the movie. The ghosts don't just appear, they seduce. The hotel feeds on Jack's shame, his failures, his anger. Every bad decision in his life, replayed until he starts to believe the only way forward is through blood. And when the snow traps them inside, the Overlook stops pretending. Jack's typewriter goes quiet. His mallet replaces the axe from the film. He starts hunting his wife and son through the hallways, smiling, calling for them like it's a game. The topiary animals move when you aren't looking. The boiler downstairs ticks toward disaster. In the end, it's not Danny's psychic power that stops the Overlook. It's Jack's last, flickering moment of himself. Just enough to sabotage the boiler and take the whole place down with him. But the Overlook doesn't die. Hotels can be rebuilt. Memories can be repainted. And evil? Evil always finds a way to check back in. The Shining isn't about ghosts. It's about how the worst parts of us don't need much help to take over. Just the right room, the right silence, and a door you can't get out of. Wittgenstein's Mistress. The world is gone. Or maybe it never was. The narrator, a woman named Kate, believes she's the last human alive. She types her thoughts on a typewriter in an empty house, on an empty beach, in an empty world. She leaves messages in deserted places. Someone is alive, but no one ever answers. Her writing drifts like tides. She talks about art, history, philosophy. She tells stories about Leonardo da Vinci, Rembrandt, and especially Ludwig Wittgenstein, whose words seem to haunt her. She remembers living in cities, traveling across continents, walking through museums that now belong only to dust. But the way she tells these stories is fractured. Events blur, timelines contradict, facts shift. Sometimes she admits she might be misremembering. Sometimes she changes the story entirely, mid-sentence. It's not just that she's alone. It's that she's alone with a mind that's unraveling. There's no apocalypse described, no virus, no war. Just the fact that one day she noticed there were no people anywhere, and she kept going. Days and seasons blend. She burns furniture for warmth. She writes in the sand, knowing the tide will erase it. She talks to herself because there's no one else left to listen. As the pages go on, it becomes clear that the book isn't about the mystery of what happened to the world. It's about the disintegration of memory when there's nothing to anchor it. Without other people, there's no one to confirm if your memories are real. No one to say, yes, that happened. Reality becomes something you can rearrange at will. By the end, there's no resolution, no sudden survivor appears, no explanation for the empty planet is given. Kate keeps typing, filling the silence with words that might mean nothing or everything. She's not even sure if she's telling the truth anymore. The final pages leave her in the same place she started, utterly alone, speaking into the void. The horror isn't in a sudden twist or violent end. It's in the realization that this is all there is. Endless days in a world with no witnesses and no proof that you ever really existed at all. I Am Legend. Every night they come, the windows are boarded, the doors are barred, but the vampires still pound and call his name. Robert Neville might be the last human alive. By day, he hunts them, stakes their bodies, burns them in the sun. By night, he locks himself inside and drinks until the screaming fades. The plague didn't just kill people, it changed them. It took neighbors, friends, his wife, and gave them back as pale, hungry shadows. When his infected wife came home after her burial, scratching at the door, Neville didn't open it, but he still hears her voice sometimes in the dark. Immunity should be a gift, but immunity means survival, and survival means watching the world rot while you stay whole. Months turn to years. Neville learns their patterns. Some are slow and feral, their minds gone. Others are adapting, thinking. They don't always attack and rage anymore. Sometimes they watch him from the shadows. Sometimes they test his defenses. He becomes obsessed with the why, studies their blood, experiments with cures, tests garlic, crosses running water, discovers what works and what's just superstition. The answers come slowly, and with them, an even darker truth. The smarter ones aren't just survivors. They're the new humanity. They've rebuilt some semblance of society while Neville's been killing them in their sleep. To them, Neville is not the last man standing. He's a murderer who hunts their kind without mercy. And when they finally capture him, there's no dramatic fight, no desperate escape. Just the moment of realization. He's not a hero in a story about monsters. He is the monster. The title I Am Legend doesn't mean what you think it means. It's not the story of a lone warrior holding back the dark. It's the origin of a myth. The bedtime story their children will hear about the terror that walks in daylight, striking without warning. Neville's death isn't a defeat. It's a transformation. He becomes a legend not in the way he hoped, but in the way monsters always are. Feared, whispered about, a warning to the next generation. The world moved on without him. The kindly ones. Max Aue is not a hero. He's not even an anti-hero. He's a former SS officer, a cultured, intelligent man who insists he's just like you. A civil servant who happened to work for a government committing genocide. In his telling, the atrocities of the Second World War are not the work of monsters, but of ordinary men doing their jobs. That's the most chilling part. From the Eastern Front to the offices of Nazi bureaucracy, Max narrates his life with cold precision. He describes mass shootings, starvation campaigns, and extermination policies in the same tone one might use to explain filing paperwork. The horror isn't just in what he says, but in how casually he says it. But his personal life is just as poisoned. He's consumed by a toxic obsession with his twin sister, Una, a longing that crosses every boundary. His relationships are warped, his desires corrosive. He buries guilt under layers of rationalization, turning every crime, every betrayal, into something necessary. The novel is vast, covering the machinery of the Holocaust in relentless detail. We see Max navigating political rivalries within the SS, dodging purges, and carrying out orders that leave entire towns dead. He rarely admits to moral conflict. Instead, he frames himself as a victim of circumstance, caught in history's current. But moments of fracture slip through. Fever dreams, hallucinations, sudden bursts of violence that suggest a mind fraying under the weight of its own lies. As Germany collapses, Max flees through a Europe in ruins. The Allies close in. His colleagues commit suicide or are captured. He sheds uniforms and identities, trying to disappear into the chaos. When the war ends, he vanishes into a new life, escaping justice entirely. By the final pages, he's an old man living quietly in France, telling his story not as a confession, but as a record. There is no redemption, no apology, no punishment. He remains convinced that anyone placed in his position would have done the same. The title, The Kindly Ones, refers to the furies of Greek tragedy, goddesses of vengeance who punish the guilty. But in Max's world, they never come. The ending offers no catharsis, only the terrible truth that sometimes history's worst criminals walk away, untouched, and live out their days in peace. My absolute darling. Her name is Turtle. She sleeps with a pistol under her pillow. Not because she's afraid of the outside world, because she's afraid of the man who taught her how to survive it. Turtle is 14. She moves through the forest like smoke. She can kill, clean, and conceal like she was born in camouflage. Her hands are steady, her aim is flawless. But those aren't survival skills. They're chains. Because Turtle isn't just being raised. She's being crafted by her father, Marten, a man who sees the end of the world around every corner, who thinks tenderness is weakness, who wraps his violence in poetry and dares to call it love. He teaches her philosophy, he teaches her fear, and worst of all, he teaches her to think she deserves it. There are no ghosts in this story, no supernatural horror. The cabin is real. The abuse is real. And the slow psychological strangulation of Turtle's life is so well written that you start to feel it in your own chest. Not because of what's shown, but because of what's never spoken. The silence between bruises, the dread between sentences, and then she meets people. A joke, a moment of awkward kindness, a human connection, and suddenly her world, built from obedience and bone, begins to tremble. Like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't born to survive under someone else's fist. But freedom? Freedom isn't a sunrise. It's not a movie montage. It's ugly. It's bleeding. It's a gun shaking in her hand. It's the realization that everything she knows might be a lie. And still, she fights. She claws her way out of the dark, barefoot and terrified, with only one thing keeping her moving. The terrifying idea that she might actually deserve better. My Absolute Darling is one of the darkest books you'll ever read because it forces you to sit with powerlessness, to feel how hard it is to escape when the monster is the only person who ever said they loved you. And when Turtle finally reclaims her story, it doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like a girl gasping for air after nearly drowning in someone else's idea of love. The remainder. A man falls from the sky. We don't know how. Neither does he. There was an incident, we're told. A piece of architecture or machine, something heavy, something sharp, came loose and destroyed part of his brain. The details, sealed under non-disclosure. All he's left with is a body that moves like it's been borrowed, a mind glitching through moments like a scratched CD. And then he gets a payout. £8.5 million. Enough to rebuild reality, literally. Because this man, who doesn't know himself, doesn't trust memory, doesn't feel real, decides to spend his wealth reconstructing the past. Not his past, just a past. He buys a building and populates it with actors. He pays people to cook liver and scratch their heads and open windows at the exact same time every day. Over and over. A man walks down the stairs. A woman listens to music. A cat moves across the roof. And he watches. He absorbs. He adjusts. Until every flicker of light, every scuff on the floor, matches the version in his head. This isn't art, it's madness. But also, it's honest. Because Remainder is about what it means to be you when memory doesn't work. When trauma has rewired your brain so badly that nothing feels real unless it's reenacted. He doesn't want fantasy. He wants certainty. He wants cause, effect, repetition, meaning. But that hunger escalates from peaceful memories to violent ones, to darker, more visceral recreations that involve blood, death, even murder. Not for power, not for thrill, for authenticity. Because how do you know you're alive if nothing feels like it matters? That's the horror of Remainder. At Sematary, the road doesn't care. It doesn't slow down for grief. It doesn't blink for innocence. It just keeps moving. Tires spinning, blood soaking into the gravel. And for Dr. Lewis Creed, That road takes everything. A new house, a new start, a beautiful family. But just behind the woods, something waits. An old path, carefully hidden, leading to a strange, ancient burial ground where the soil is sour, where death isn't permanent, where what comes back isn't what left. When the family cat dies, it returns, but colder, wrong. Its eyes not quite feline anymore. And when Lewis's toddler son dies, taken by that same indifferent road, he does the unthinkable. He buries him there. Because grief isn't logical. It's desperate. It doesn't care about warnings or history. It just wants the pain to stop. But pain doesn't stop. It transforms. What comes back from that soil isn't a miracle. It's a message. A cruel echo of love twisted into something unrecognizable. A child that walks and talks, but whose smile doesn't reach its eyes, whose voice feels borrowed, whose return feels like a curse dressed in lullabies. And you, the reader, are dragged into that slow, suffocating realization that some doors, once open, don't shut, that some love, when stretched too far, becomes horror. Because Pet Sematary isn't about zombies. It's about the rot under the skin of perfect families. The kind of horror that doesn't chase you. It sits next to you at dinner, it wears your kids' pajamas, and it asks you to read it a bedtime story while holding a scalpel behind its back. Stephen King didn't write this book as entertainment. He shelved it, called it too dark, but it crawled back out like everything buried in that cursed ground. And when readers opened it, they weren't scared of monsters. They were scared of themselves, of what they'd do for one more moment with someone they lost, of how far they'd go to undo death. And the deeper fear? That they'd do exactly what Lewis did, and then lie to themselves that it was love. Geek Love. They made their own children, literally. The Banuski family runs a traveling carnival, but they're not just performers. They're curators of the grotesque. And in a twisted pursuit of fame and purity, the parents, Al and Crystal Lil, take drugs, radiation, and toxins during pregnancy, on purpose, to create children with birth defects, freaks as they proudly call them, and it works. Arturo has flippers for limbs. Iphigenia and Electra are Siamese twins. Chick has telekinetic powers. And Olympia, our narrator, is a bald albino hunchback dwarf. But this isn't a horror story about deformity. It's about what happens when family becomes a cult. Because Arturo, the golden boy with fins, turns his siblings into followers. He preaches about self-mutilation, about the beauty of sacrificing body parts to reach spiritual enlightenment. And people listen. People follow. They give up fingers, arms, eyes for him. And Olympia, she loves him. Even as he chips away at everything around them. Even as the carnival transforms from stage act into religion. Even as her body is used. Her voice silenced. Her identity twisted into obedience. Geek Love is sickening not because of what's done, but because of what's believed. The idea that love is pain, that loyalty means surrender, that family can redefine reality and call it devotion. And at the center of it is Olympia, a girl born into a circus, taught to smile through cruelty, to mistake abuse for affection, to protect the very people who destroyed her. But this isn't just tragedy, it's prophecy. Because Olympia isn't just a freak, she's a mother. And when her own daughter enters the world, you start to wonder, will the cycle break? Or will it continue, draped in sequins and applause? Dunn's novel shoves your face into the mud of identity, body autonomy, and inherited trauma. It whispers, you think your family's messed up? Look closer. The Willows. It starts with a river, 2 men, a canoe, open sky, and the gentle hush of water sliding past ancient trees. But then the river widens, and the trees change. They pass into a desolate stretch of wilderness where nature doesn't feel alive. It feels aware. The Willows crowd around them, not aggressively, not violently, just watching, listening, leaning in a little too close, and then the ground begins to shift. Literally. Islands vanish overnight. Sandbars crumble. The map stops matching the world around them. Welcome to the Willows, a story where nothing actually jumps out. Nothing screams. No monsters chase you through the dark. But something watches you. Something judges you. Something waits until you stop pretending you're in control. Because the horror here is cosmic, ancient, silent. The men find strange markings in the sand. Pyramids, symbols, tracks that don't belong to any living thing. They hear sounds that make no sense, see shapes that move against the wind. And as days pass, their minds begin to bend. Not snap, just tilt. They start to believe the trees are alive, that the air has weight, that the land itself resents their presence, that they've stumbled into a place not meant for humans. A thin patch in the fabric of the world where something older, vaster, and entirely inhuman is brushing against our reality, and it doesn't want them there. The Willows is often called the greatest weird tale ever written, not because of jump scares, but because it erodes your sense of certainty. It strips away the illusion that the world is stable or safe or ours. Blackwood understood that true fear isn't about being chased. It's about being insignificant. Tiny men in a boat, drifting through a pocket of existence where human logic doesn't apply, where the rules you thought governed life, time, space, gravity, sanity, don't mean anything anymore. On the beach. The world ended 6 months ago. Nobody screamed, fought, even noticed, because they were already gone. The missiles fell, the sky turned black, and the silence rolled in like a tide. Radioactive, invisible, absolute. Now all that's left is a ticking clock, and one last corner of the world waiting to die. Welcome to Australia. And on the beach, death isn't fast. It's not dramatic, it's slow, deliberate, sterile, like someone turned down the volume on humanity. A U.S. submarine captain, Dwight, docks in Melbourne, a city still untouched by fallout, but not for long. The radiation is drifting south. No one will be spared. They know it. They've done the math. And yet, people live. They plant gardens, throw dinner parties, talk about fishing, gas shortages, and how nice the weather's been. A woman named Moira drinks too much and falls in love too late. A young couple has a baby they'll never see grow up. They are not delusional. They are not brave. They are just human. And as the days count down, the government starts distributing suicide pills, quietly, like aspirin. No big announcement, no panic. Just a polite little envelope that says, "Here, when you're ready." That's the horror, not fire or monsters, but how normal the end becomes. Because on the beach doesn't give you war. It gives you after. It gives you the numb space where no one screams, because screaming doesn't matter anymore. And yet, it hits harder than any dystopia, because we've all imagined it. The last coffee, the last goodbye, the last time you pretend the world is fine, and Shoot doesn't flinch. He lets you sit there, in the silence, watching families go for walks, watching the wind carry death closer. This isn't a book, it's a forum. Anonymous usernames, pixelated pictures, pages that read like dark corners of the internet you probably shouldn't click. At first, it's about sex, escorts, reviews, who's hot, who's fake, who's available. A man named Brad appears, beautiful, submissive, damaged. And like vultures to roadkill, the users swarm. But as the threads pile up, something shifts. Stories contradict each other. Details change. Some say Brad was beaten. Others say he liked it. Some claim he's dead. Others swear they saw him last week. Reality bends. truth melts, and the reader becomes just another voyeur, addicted, guessing, doubting everything. Because this isn't about Brad, it's about us, the watchers, the posters, the ones refreshing the page for more pain dressed up as pleasure. And that's the horror, the blurring of lines between obsession and affection, between fantasy and footage, between that's messed up and send the link. Dennis Cooper turns the internet into a haunted house, not with ghosts, but with people, hungry, horny, cruel, hiding behind usernames while passing around trauma like it's a meme. American Psycho. Patrick Bateman has a business card. That's all he really is. A name, embossed in bone white. Font, Cillian Rail. He has a perfect haircut, a perfect suit, a perfect life, and no soul. In American Psycho, horror doesn't wear a mask. It wears Armani. Bateman is a Wall Street investment banker. But that's just camouflage. His real obsession isn't money. It's control, skin, screams, the way a body comes apart when no one's watching, or maybe when they are, and just don't care. He kills, then eats sushi. He dismembers women, then reviews albums. He is both predator and parody. A monster stitched together from 80s greed and cocaine dust, who speaks like a magazine ad and thinks like a void. But here's the terrifying part. No one notices. Not his colleagues, not his lovers, not even the cops. He blends in so perfectly with the other plastic men around him that his bloodstained trail looks like a cologne ad. Even his confessions are treated like jokes. Like maybe he didn't do any of it. Maybe it was all in his head. Or maybe reality is so numb, so hyper-stylized, that mass murder looks like another networking event. The genius of American Psycho is that you never quite know what's real. Did Bateman actually feed a stray cat to an ATM? Or is that just another crack in a consumer-driven mind that's rotted from the inside out? He's not a serial killer in the traditional sense. He's a mirror, held up to every reader, to every culture that prizes surface over substance, a culture that sells suffering as aesthetic, where a man can be handsome, rich, articulate, and completely hollow, and still be rewarded for it. There's a reason the book was banned, censored, burned. It isn't just the gore, it's the way it shows us how easy it is to become numb, to scroll past violence, to laugh at evil if it's dressed well enough. By the end, Bateman is still walking, still talking, still free, and all that's left is a blank wall and the words, "This is not an exit," because maybe he never existed, or maybe we're all just really good at pretending he doesn't. Okay, so that's it for today. Now subscribe.